Why do growing businesses love working in Slack? Let's ask Christy at Ari Bikes.
Running things in Slack saves me so much time.
AI summaries save 97 minutes per week. What say you, Rox from Gosney?
Slack helps us build community, it helps us build connection.
Your partners, vendors and customers all in one place. Take us on home, Ashley from Caraway.
If we didn't have Slack tomorrow, I would explode.
Well, let's not let that happen. Visit slack.com/podcast to get 50% off Slack Business Plus.
I mean, the U.S. overthrew a government at gunpoint with no plan. Doesn't this bother anyone?
Hey, look, I'm appreciative of what the president has done with this. And I know there's going to be those out there that are going to be the critics. But, you know, when you break a few eggs, we got to learn how to make some omelets with it. And this is exactly what we're going to do.
We break a few eggs, then learn how to make an omelet? I mean, this guy f***ed up the metaphor so badly that he accidentally got it right. But look, I get what's happening here, okay? No one in MAGA expected this to happen. So they're all scrambling to find an answer that makes sense to them. Even MAGA mega church pastors are flipping through the Bible like, hey, there's gotta be something in here.
They say you have seized Venezuela for the oil. Yes, this is true. But the spiritual oil and the natural oil does not belong to the forces of darkness. And the oil of the natural and the oil of the spirit is mine, says the Lord.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics podcast that promises to protect you without taking you over. I'm Andreou.
And I'm Naomi Smith. Quiet Riot does the hard yards on sifting the signal from the noise so you don't have to.
So take a deep breath, remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint, and get ready for the very first time in 2026 to join another Quiet Riot.
Quiet Riot. Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Naomi, the rare earth mineral sleeping under the ice.
And I'm Alex, the commoner's muck quartz that is plentiful but pretty.
This week we look at what else? The madness of King Trump and America's plan to own its continent.
And back home, but very much related, we dig into government rhetoric pointing to an acceleration of the UK-EU reset and plans for a more dynamic alignment with a bloc.
To help us, we have the host of our sister show Behind the Lines, former diplomat and security expert, Arthur Snell. Welcome back, Arthur.
Hello. Happy 2026.
Going well, isn't it?
Got off to a great start.
Arthur, in weeks like the last few, do you miss being at the Foreign Office and seeing all the confidential briefings, or are you actually thankful?
I'll be very honest, sometimes you miss it, but I think one of the oddities of the Trump era is that not much is really happening in secret, because you can read Truth Social, you can watch the press conferences. It's very confusing and chaotic, but in terms of secrecy, a lot seems to be happening in the open.
It was said before Trump's first spell as president that we should not take what he says seriously. After he was re-elected for a second term, this wisdom was amended to suggest that we should take what he says seriously, but not literally. It turns out Trump should be taken both very seriously and very literally.
Let me just be very clear. This is the first time that I've addressed Venezuela from the podium since being back and since the historic and incredibly successful military operation, law enforcement operation that you all saw and the world witnessed last week. The might of the United States military and our country under the leadership of this president is on full display to the rest of the world. And let's just set the record straight. There isn't another military in the world who could have pulled off this operation. There is not another president in the world or in our nation's history who had the courage to authorize such a mission. And I think the world has taken notice that America is truly back.
In the wee hours of Saturday morning, the US military bombed several locations in and around Caracas and made off with President Maduro and his wife. Foes, but also some friends, have condemned the action. Trump's statements about the US running Venezuela were walked back very quickly. It is a function of the pace of what is unfolding that the Venezuela situation has disappeared from the BBC front page to be replaced by Trump signaling his intention to take Greenland for America, and a crisis around a Russian oil tanker currently north of Ireland, which the US has commandeered and the Russian Navy has failed to protect. European leaders have issued a joint statement basically telling Trump, hands off Greenland, but in the most passive-aggressive way possible. Importantly, and not by coincidence, I'm sure, negotiations on both the ceasefire deal between the US and Ukrainian delegations and security guarantees among the coalition of the willing, so-called, have taken significant steps forward. I am certain that by the time you listen to this, all of it will be out of date. But what is worth unpicking are the motives, the patterns, and the risks that sit behind such action. So, Arthur, what are your reflections on the madness of the last few days? Just very bird's eye view, first of all.
Well, I think I'll start actually, Alex, with where you started, that we have to take him seriously and literally. So if we go back just about a month to the National Security Strategy, which came out in early December, it was a document full of big expressions of how America wants to be whiter, it wants Europe to be whiter, it wants to control the Western Hemisphere. It doesn't really care very much about great power competition. It wants a big balance of power between the US, Russia, China. I think all of these things we're now seeing playing out. And Venezuela is one case study, Greenland's another. But in many cases, you could argue that the strategy is there for anyone to read, and you can then predict his actions as they relate to that.
How about you, Naomi? What's your takeaway, the thing that struck you?
I think it's that he is a king. He wants to be a king. He sees himself as a king, and he is acting like a king. And that just makes me revisit the state visit that we gave him, the second state visit, as having just reinforced that sense of monarch in him. Mm-hmm. I wasn't happy with it at the time. You and I disagreed on that. And I think it was a mistake, because I think what it actually did was to reinforce this view of unelected superpower leadership figure that he has always striven to be. I think we are looking at the complete end of the world order as we knew it, if not already happening. Certainly we're headed towards that direction, particularly if there are deals that are going to be done around support for Ukraine in return for going easy on him, taking Greenland, whatever may come forward. So, yeah, I think I'm sort of this week reassessing the whole of how 2025 tried to treat and appease Trump. And actually, I think all it really did was to reinforce his sense of I am king.
I mean, again, I differ slightly from that. I don't think Trump needed any encouragement to feel the way he feels and to act the way he acts.
So we shouldn't have given him it.
No, but the only thing
that you're right.
The only thing that can check him is internal, and that hasn't been forthcoming. Basically, Congress has bent the knee to him, and there's been really very little internal opposition to what he's doing. You look at the balance of power in real terms, and I'm not sure that poking him in the eye or antagonizing him would have been helpful, because he has shown himself to be petty and vindictive and unpredictable. So the bottom line is we have a nut at the moment in charge of the world's most powerful military. I'm not sure what the right strategy is. I'm not sure whether the aphorism that the only thing that bullies respond to is if you stand up to them is right. I think it's actually quite ahistorical. Every major war has involved someone standing up to a bully that then didn't back down.
I think we have to box clever. I think to unnecessarily provoke him is, of course, an unwise move. But I do think there needs to be more of an acceptance amongst European, and I include the UK in that, leaders, to accept the world that Trump wants to create. And
do you think that's not there behind the scenes? That's because to me, that's fully there behind the scenes, and everyone is basically playing for time.
Well, I'd love to know Arthur's view on it, because I think there is a trust issue. I would love to believe it. But I don't, because I don't trust them enough, because they've not given me enough reason to believe that that is the strategy. There has been far too much petty squabbling over, by being nice, we got, a tiny marginally less of a tariff hit than the other people who didn't kowtow to him quite as much as we did. Therefore, it was totally the right thing to do. Trump wants to create a world where might is right, that is antithetical to democracy. He so desperately wants to be king. Arthur, do you believe that there is a strategy behind the lack of very, very hard condemnation of what Trump has done from Western leaders?
I think there's a strategy. What I don't know is whether the concomitant commitment to build up our own defense capabilities is being pursued adequately. So there's clearly a strategy in the sense that yesterday was a great example. You have the conference in Paris. We're full of these split screen moments. You've got the conference in Paris where the UK and France are doing everything they can to secure the commitment to support Ukraine, to keep the US on board. You had Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff there, who are at the saner end of the MAGA world. They're probably corrupt and self-serving, but I think they're sane. And the idea there is we've got to get America to commit to some degree of security guarantees so that we can then talk about having a tripwire force in Ukraine. At the same time, you've got Denmark, of course, a very committed NATO member, not a large country, but a very capable military, very committed NATO member, one of the strongest allies of the United States, understandably losing its shit because Trump refuses to stop going on about Greenland, refuses to say that he recognizes Danish sovereignty. So it makes sense to try to keep Trump as on board as you can whilst you're trying to sort NATO, and at the same time, build up your military at absolute breakneck speed. Now, the problem is I don't think we're doing the absolute breakneck speed, build up the military. And I think that's where we have the problem. And I think there is an issue here that particularly for some smaller European countries, quite understandably, if you're Danish, are you actually going to say, yeah, we're going to send our young men to the ice cap of Greenland to get killed by US Marines? Or are you going to say, well, I don't know, what are we supposed to do? It's the world's most powerful military. It's hundreds of times bigger than ours. What are we actually supposed to do here? And I think this is where it's very difficult. And oddly, the dilemmas that some small European countries had in 1938, 1939 do feel familiar. And I'm sure some people don't like that comparison, but it does seem relevant.
I would agree with you. I think that Chamberlain did eventually come to the right conclusion. I think Starmer will. I just think he needs to be more Churchill than Chamberlain in this moment.
Yeah, so that is, I think, where I have an issue with this rather compressed view of the past. Calling out other leaders, especially when they are in charge of a nation that's much more powerful than you, it didn't really used to be part of the diplomatic vocabulary, as far as I remember it. You called out other leaders, as Churchill did, when you were ready to go to war. And that's the point, isn't it? You call out other leaders if you are prepared to back it up with actual military action and blood. If you're not prepared to back it up, the notion that just being mean to Trump on social media will somehow have a psychological effect on him that will shift him away from doing these outrageous things, my view is it would actually accelerate his madness. But that's what I don't understand, this notion of calling someone out without actually the military force to back that up, or the public opinion to back that up.
Anyone who's tried to understand Trump's character, and we're all in the same spot there, he is someone who looks like the more you say, please don't seize Greenland, the more he's going to insist that it's the absolute top priority and the thing he most wants to do. You're right to talk about diplomatic language. We don't have a diplomatic language for this because it's not normal for your main ally of the last 80 years to suddenly turn on a dime and become the main threat to your territorial integrity.
Arthur, you were lucky enough to speak to Catherine Royal on Sunday for Behind the Lines, who was UK ambassador to Venezuela and also, importantly, I think, went on to work for NATO for several years.
Yes.
What was her takeaway impression of that first phase of the madness that happened, as it were?
So Catherine was there in Venezuela at a time when Hugo Chavez was still alive. She knew Maduro because he was foreign minister at that time, and also knew Delcy Rodriguez, and was very interesting on her as somebody who, of course, is now the interim president of Venezuela, somebody who is a sort of pragmatist in her approach, but still very much ideologically committed to the Chavez socialist revolution. Fascinating discussion. Obviously, encourage listeners to have a listen. But the takeaway is that it's not really clear what the Trump objective is, because let's ignore the stuff about drugs and counter narcotics, because there's a sort of nonsense.
It
there.
really doesn't apply to Venezuela, does it?
No, Venezuela doesn't make fentanyl. It doesn't make cocaine. Yes, some of it transits through Venezuela, but not enough to really, change the price of eggs. So let's say it's about oil, stealing oil, about Donald Trump probably enriching himself. And in fact, there's been an announcement today that literally the profits from the oil effectively seized from Venezuela will be managed by the president of the United States. I mean, I've worked in some of the most corrupt countries in the world, including in West Africa, and you wouldn't imagine that there, and now we're seeing it in the US. So, yes, maybe that's what it is. But then we come to the realities of the oil industry at the moment and the oil industry in Venezuela. And Venezuela is basically, the equivalent of someone saying, here, I'm going to give you this grand manor house. Oh, by the way, it's going to take 3 million quid before you can even sleep one night in it because the roof has fallen in and the walls have collapsed. And Venezuela's oil industry needs billions of dollars to get it up and running. And importantly, the world oil price now is not very high. It's about as low as it's been since the pandemic, since it dropped off from that initial spike in the pandemic. And I don't think, I'm not here to predict the oil price, but I don't think there's evidence it's about to shoot back up again.
In fact, Arthur, let's have a listen to exactly that, because I chose that segment precisely of what Catherine Royal was saying.
To be honest, I was really sort of bemused by it because I was trying to think of this in terms of, well, what is the US interest in this? Why is it that Trump is seemingly so concerned about Maduro when there are other problems in the world? You're wondering quite why he's putting all of these amazing maritime assets in the Caribbean. Why isn't he looking at what China's doing? Sort of really was going through my head. So I certainly didn't predict that he was going to do this. I very much doubted there was going to be a land invasion because that would be a ridiculous folly and an extremely difficult thing to do even for the US military. So it looked as if it was I thought it would just carry on a little bit as it was, but there were certainly noises of people saying, well, the ships can't stay at post forever because, there are consequences to that in sort of the training of the crews and the equipment maintenance and all the rest of this stuff. And so they can't be there forever. So you're starting to wonder, well, what was going to happen? But what did happen came as a total shock.
Catherine's central point was, I guess, that the US has much bigger fish to fry. But despite what she said, I have seen quite a lot of analysis, including from the BBC's China correspondent, that this was about limiting Chinese influence in Latin America because Venezuela was China's closest partner in the region. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, I think this takes us to that question of the Monroe Doctrine, which was briefly renamed the Trump corollary in the national security strategy. But I think Trump can't say the word corollary because it's quite one of those hard ones. So he's now calling it the Donroe Doctrine, which it is easier to say. And this is not a history podcast, but basically in 1823, the Americans wanted to stop European colonialism in the wider Americas, particularly South America. And of course, at that time, the United States was a young country itself, fairly recently had freed itself from British colonialism, and they didn't want European colonizers to continue to operate on their continent. Over time, the Monroe Doctrine has become something rather different, and it's basically a much more assertive doctrine which says we're America, we do what we want in the Americas and nobody else gets in our way. So, of course, both China and Russia had very close and strong relations with Venezuela, partly because of this sort of socialist, anti-Western worldview, partly, I think, in China's case, because actually they've been trying to build up their own global strategic energy network. So China's invested quite a lot in energy in the Americas, as well as all kinds of other places. And so, yes, the Donroe Doctrine is saying to the world, this is our patch, get off our patch, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Cuba, whether indeed it's Greenland, this is our patch. But there's an implicit deal there, which is saying to the Russians, but if you want to do something in Ukraine, we're not really going to get in your way. That's Europe's problem, and we think Europe's a mess anyway. So there is this new kind of spheres of influence attitude, which says that there are great powers in the world, and they can do what they want in their own regions.
Yeah. I've also seen other analysis that suggest in quite strong terms that the reason China hasn't moved on Taiwan is nothing to do with any of this stuff, and none of this stuff will make it even marginally more or less likely. Effectively, the reason it hasn't done is because its policy of economic coercion is working. You could also argue that Russia has hardly felt inhibited from going for the regions that it wants when it wants.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
The number one resolution for people last year was to save more money, but nearly half gave up by February. Don't let that be you. Download Rocket Money to reach your financial goals this year. Track your spending, cut waste, and automate savings in one simple app. Rocket Money shows you all your expenses and categorizes them, so you know exactly where your money's going and where you're overspending. From there, the app cuts waste by canceling your unused subscriptions and lowering your bills. No customer service needed. With that money freed up, the app will automatically set some cash aside for your goals, whether it's an emergency fund, paying off debt, or saving for vacation. Rocket Money's got you covered. Users love the app, with over 186,000 five-star ratings. And on average, users can save up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Make saving money a priority this year. Go to rocketmoney.com/cancel to get started. That's rocketmoney.com/cancel. rocketmoney.com/cancel.
So on Greenland, which you mentioned, what do you both think the strategic objective, I guess, is? Is it to put threats on the table so that the economic deal that is struck, whatever, lease Greenland to the US for X number of years or give them exclusive mineral rights or whatever, is more advantageous for America? Or does Trump actually visualize full annexation?
I think that for a man who has denied climate change, Greenland is where that lie falls flat. And it is now a much more strategically geolocated area than previously, with the melting of polar ice caps.
And more drillable.
It'll be the economic deal that he really wants, because that's, he is the man of the deal and he's a businessman and he wants the minerals that Greenland has and the gateway to oceans that it is now able to provide. He wouldn't stop short of full annexation if that's what it required to get the economic deal.
How about you, Arthur?
I agree to a large extent with what Naomi's just said. There is this fascinating thing, isn't there, that for people who don't believe in climate change, they seem awfully interested in getting hold of critical minerals that you need to manage the energy transition. But putting that on one side, I think there's a range of factors with Trump that, as I've said, there's this idea of it's our backyard. There's even the basic point that it looks really big on a map. If we were dealing with anyone else who say, oh, come on, don't be ridiculous, and no one makes decisions on that basis, that's just the sort of basis that he makes decisions on. But I think also the fact that it is currently controlled by a woke, liberal European country which has become highly secularized and is multicultural. I think that gets at Trump. So I think there's a lot of factors coming together. The national security strategy is incredibly anti-European. And so I think it's particularly offensive to them, the idea that a European country could have so much seeming territorial power.
He 100% could not point out Denmark on a map. 100%.
Oh, I'm sure you're right.
No way.
But he doesn't like the sound of it. You know,
Doesn't like the sound of it. Yeah.
It sounds like a place where women have rights and all kinds of nonsense.
It sounds like a woke place. So European leaders have met. They've issued a statement. As I said, it is as strong as it can be without directly criticizing Trump. Meanwhile, there does seem to be some progress on the Ukraine front. And I can't help but wonder, could it be that this is the backroom deal that has been struck? Let me do what I want on my continent, as it were, and I will defend you in Ukraine for a limited period of time.
I think the problem there is that what we're talking about is security assurances. And that's been the long-running theme. At the point where the Americans under Trump said, we're really not going to bother with Ukraine, the Europeans' response was, okay, fine, we'll do most of the heavy lifting, but you've got to give us a kind of security backstop. There is some indication that the Americans have more or less agreed to that in principle. But it just seems to me that you can't trust anything that Trump says to you. And if one day you think you've got an assurance that there is some kind of security deal, it just feels very possible that the next day he's had a phone call with Vladimir Putin and the deal is off the table. And of course, Putin is much better at playing Trump than almost any other world leader. I totally understand why it's necessary for European countries to at least be able to announce that they have a deal, but I'm not sure that the deal itself is worth very much.
I agree. I don't really understand what is looking good or what progress there really is on the Ukraine front, purely for what Arthur has just said. Peace work in the US is nothing but political theatre. I don't see that we're nearer. I think we are wasting months. I think all the liberal democracies of Europe need to be working together much better. We're going to talk a bit more about that in topic 2. And I think if what we're getting at is US obtaining Greenland in return for tacit support in Ukraine, then we are back to accepting that the world order as we know it is over. And I don't think we should give it up that easily. We need to support the men and women on the front line of Ukraine who are there protecting us, frankly, because they are the first line of defense for the rest of us from Putin. And as Arthur says, whatever Trump and Putin agreed to today, they'll undo tomorrow. And I don't think it's worth the paper it's written on.
I mean, my response is, and I will leave you to untangle this, that a meaningless deal with Trump over security guarantees in Ukraine is still more meaningful than not having one.
I understand the point that you're making that, maybe something's better than nothing and all the rest of it. But if that unpredictable tacit support for Ukraine is at the cost of annexing Greenland, then we are fundamentally accepting that the spheres of influence is the way of the world order now, not the post-war consensus we had for the last 100 years.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, but that is where we are. There's an argument that it's already happened, and it's already happened because over a period of decades, European nations have allowed America to become so outsized in terms of its military capability.
Which is appeasement. To say we're going to go along with this because we don't want the financial burden of doing it ourselves. I mean, that's been the trade-off of it. It's been, okay, these guys have got more money, they're prepared to do it. And if we let them, then we haven't got to have those difficult decisions made within our own domestic parliaments and pan-regional ones at the European Union level to get our military together. I'm just very cross. I'm very cross that we've kind of sleptwalked into a situation that we're now giving up really quite easily when we don't have to and when we have got the strength and the might within Europe to fight Putin properly.
I'm not sure, because things are changing so rapidly, I'm not sure where I am emotionally, to be honest. I just get the sense that sometimes quite a lot of the people saying no, stand up to him. I don't see where that then goes. And I have the distinct impression that a lot of the people saying poke him in the eye would not be at the top of the queue to then join the army when it comes to actually putting their life on the line. And so I don't know how that is then
But
resolved.
I think we will have to if we appease now, because Putin won't stop in Ukraine, Alex. That's the point. So it doesn't matter whether we would choose to. It's not about, as I said, it's not about an unnecessary provocation of Trump, but it is about saying we've got to get our act together across Europe.
What option do you think Zelensky would have chosen, given the events of the last weekend? Would Zelensky want an escalation in the relationship between European countries and the White House, or to try and keep the process going?
We've got Arthur here. We should get the expert into answer
come on,
that.
Arthur.
But I think that Zelensky has his job, which is to protect the Ukrainian people, and they are not members of the European Union. We are former members of the European Union, intrinsically linked to the EU, even more so than Ukraine. And we are, with the European Union, allowing the Ukrainians to be the front line of our own defense against Putin and his advancement, and this new world order, which seems to now be dominated by three strong men carving up the world between them. And we have done precious little to curb that when we could have done it before Trump took office. And I just find it incredibly frustrating, as I often do on this show when we talk about Ukraine, that we don't want Putin to win, but not in any way having a strategy about how Ukraine can hold the line and push Putin back.
Arthur?
There are loads of things that have, what makes this a particularly difficult situation is that a lot of things have come together at one point. So Ukraine, Russia, Trump being basically on Russia's side, not all the time, but a lot of the time, and then layered on top of that, the Greenland stuff. It's very hard to unpick all of that. I think the basic point about European security and defense is that, yes, it's way better than it was. And I'm including Britain in that. It's way better than it was. We've all agreed to spend more. And of course, Trump will claim that's solely due to him, but it is partly due to him. But it's still a long way off where it would need to be. And even if on day one, Keir Starmer had said, we can't afford to risk what's coming down the line, there wouldn't have been time. I'm not saying it was right to do what was done, but there wouldn't have been time to fix this by any means. It's going to take years and years and years. The other thing, I think it's a very legitimate criticism that there's institutional transatlanticism, particularly in the UK, but in a lot of Europe, even probably the French, that it's just quite hard for people to get their heads around the idea that these people are just not behaving like allies anymore, and they don't really care about us. And so I think all of these problems sit there. And I guess that the real challenge is when you have something like Greenland. I mean, Greenland is a bit anomalous. I'm not here questioning Denmark's right to it being part of the kingdom, but it is a vast bit of land which only 50,000 people live on. It's fine until such time as someone like Trump comes along and says, well, I'll have that. And for a lot of human history, that's how international relations worked. And after World War II, we thought we'd had enough of that. So we created structures that would mean that didn't happen anymore. Now, unfortunately, Trump doesn't care, probably doesn't know any history. None of his family have served in the military. It's quite interesting over generations. So we're stuck with this situation as it is at present. I'm not giving answers, but I don't see any particular solutions that even present themselves other than we just have to keep playing along, trying to minimize the long-term damage, both for Ukraine and for wider European security.
Meanwhile, because I think the domestic is also worth looking into, nobody's talking about the Epstein files anymore. The deadline for Pam Bondi to explain why she was basically in contempt was Monday. And this has completely subsumed all of that. So, I mean, could it be that the motives for this chaos are actually much simpler?
I think it may well have affected the timing, but not the overall plan. I think they were always going to do it, but I think that the timing is incredibly coincidental, Alex, put it that way.
What do you think, Arthur? Because I've seen a lot of US commentators we have the MAGA equivalent of criminologists now, right?
Yeah.
There has developed a body of people with insight into the MAGA movement, some of them even from the first Trump term. And they're saying that basically the US did a deal with the Maduro regime. If you step back and look at it, the same regime still runs Venezuela. You have Maduro basically being paraded around the New York jail and court system. You have outrageous statements being made about Greenland that Trump has actually made before. He hasn't said anything he hasn't said before. And all of it is followed breathlessly by the media without anything having actually changed underneath. He's basically bossing the news cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to that summit in Paris, which was there to deal with something really serious and urgent, the war in Ukraine, how we support our ally there. And of course, half the day is spent trying to reassure, manage, communicate whether or not one of the key members of NATO, Denmark, is under threat. I don't go for the interpretation of this is the only reason it's happening, but I would certainly agree that it is one of the many factors that you have to put into the mix when you're trying to understand Trump's behavior. If you listen to people who really understand him, they say that he's absolutely obsessed with headlines. He's absolutely obsessed with being the thing that is spoken about. And of course, getting Epstein off the news, getting the parlous state of the US economy off the news, getting bad polling, all those other things can only be positive for him.
Which might also mean, actually, that now that he's got a taste of it, he will reach for that executive power whenever he's in trouble domestically, which is also a completely different danger in its own way.
Watch out, Sadiq Khan.
And Arthur, you mentioned actually on Sunday that there is a well-observed pattern of this, albeit not to this crazy extent, but that there has been a pattern in the past that when US presidents get frustrated domestically, they turn to the toys over which they have absolute power, which is the military.
Yeah.
They exercise the power that they have. But here's the thing, foreign intervention is quite unpopular with a majority of Americans, including among the MAGA base.
In a new Reuters Ipsos poll, only 1 in 3 Americans supports the U.S. ousting Maduro, while 2/3 of Americans think Maduro is the name of a new weight loss drug. Ask your physician if Maduro is right for you. It's cocaine.
Because they were actually primed in the last election, Trump put himself forward as the president that will extract America from all these expensive foreign conflicts. And now he's doing the opposite, and there is some unhappiness in the ranks. So how will this help Trump in the long term, I mean?
Well, I don't think it helps him at all. And I think the combination of the fact that he is constitutionally barred from running again and may or may not really care very much about normal elections. And we can interpret that in different ways, i.e., does he want to suspend elections, or is he just, he's not running and he doesn't care about
in the midst of all this madness, he did kind of suggest he was thinking of suspending the next election.
Indeed. Just another thing thrown in there. But no, you're absolutely right. A core part of MAGA ideology is no more stupid foreign wars. And J.D. Vance, basically half of his book, Hillbilly Elegy, is about that. Marjorie Taylor Greene gave what seemed like a very reasoned and intelligent argument about why they shouldn't be sweeping into Venezuela. And here am I saying that Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking sense. We live in a strange world. Rand Paul, one of the most Trumpian of senators, he's very unhappy about it. So you have this thing that a core MAGA ideological point is no more stupid foreign wars. But at the same time, Trump likes things that make him look powerful and make him the headline, makes him the most important person, makes us all devote an episode of a podcast to him. And when you've got Delta Force, the CIA, and the US Navy as levers on your desk, you can see how that would really appeal to the kind of brainstem and toxic testosterone that fuels his mind.
What do you think, Naomi?
I think that there is a difference between long wars with boots on the ground, stationed tens of thousands of miles away from home, that the Americans don't want their loved ones being a long way from home for a very long time and potentially coming back in body bags. I think they are more amenable to let's fly some jets over, quickly bomb something, smash and grab and get home quickly before, be home in time for tea. There is a big difference in the public opinion on war and war. In the modern
It'll be interesting to see how polls move in the next few days. Just to wrap this section up, if we go a little bit more big picture, you were talking about the Monroe Doctrine, Arthur, and everyone's talking about sphere of influence. A couple of months ago, actually, you spoke to Professor Terra, who explained all of this, and we can have a little listen.
The Monroe Doctrine was this idea when James Monroe was the president. He was the fifth president of the U.S., in between James Madison and John Quincy Adams. So this came out in 1823. And the idea was very simple, is that geography really matters, and the U.S. is where it is on the map, and we have our national interests, our strategic interests. And because we are the dominant power in that region, we have the right to dominate the region if we want. And that region is the Caribbean and Latin America. So to reassert that now, it's interesting on many different levels, and it's also very troubling. But where Europe is concerned, the Monroe Doctrine really does kind of replace our concern with Europe in many ways. And, it's very convenient to say, I'm bringing back the Monroe Doctrine, so we're going to do whatever we want. We're going to declare people in boats as narco-terrorists. And if they're narco-terrorists, that means they're the equivalent of combatants, and we can use military force against them. But you have to look at the Monroe Doctrine as part of the MAGA, the Make America Great Again mythology, going back to an era when the U.S. was big, it was feared, and it had unquestioned dominance in its backyard. We're going back to an era where leaders who think the same way about power and who think the same way about politics. So the Monroe Doctrine is all part of the backward-looking part of the MAGA psychology that Trump calls on periodically. And if you want to talk about when America was great, so there's this, but there's also this idea of the Gilded Era around the turn of the century, from the 19th to the early 20th century, when America had unquestioned dominance, but also it had a series of policies that appealed to Trump for whatever reason. One of them is high tariffs. And it also had a social system and an economic system, which was very hierarchical. It was very much dominated by people who had money. The working class was very much at the bottom. And people like Donald Trump and the people around him just took what they wanted. And they did it because that was the natural order of things. It was also a time of what the Americans refer to as the spoils system. In government, there wasn't a meritocracy. You didn't take tests to see who was going to get a position. It was all people who were connected to people who had public office. So your network of people would come and they would assume a position, and then they would bring their cronies in, and everybody had a good share in the jobs that paid well and all of the access to various goods and other new influence networks that they had, which ultimately meant that they could line their pockets and also enjoy the prestige of being people who were running the country. So this is very much what we see during the current era in Washington, is a return to the Gilded Era along those lines as well, the spoils system.
Let me just play devil's advocate and say, our dislike for Trump's methods aside, doesn't this kind of segmentation of responsibility for regional stability actually make more sense than the horizontal model we've got now, which basically America patrols everything from Japan, Korea, all the way to the Middle East, horizontally in the Northern Hemisphere? Doesn't it make more sense to be vertically responsible, as it were, for a region's stability?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think the issue is more that previously, yes, one might say that America was world policeman and had basically got tired of it. And obviously that's been one of the arguments that goes all the way back to the Obama years, complaining that the Europeans were freeloaders. That's not a new Trump thing. That's been going on some time. I suppose, though, that one of the ways in which this is different and troubling is that it is not that America really wants security in the Americas, for example, because what they've done in Venezuela is to create insecurity. They've removed the president. You've apparently got armed militias patrolling the streets. You're blowing up boats in the Caribbean Sea, which may or may not have drugs on them, but it doesn't, it stops people from being able to do other things like go fishing or, normal economic activities. What they're essentially doing is destabilizing certain countries where they feel they don't like. So they don't like the Colombian president. They're destabilizing him, whereas they're letting, they're bankrolling Argentina, which probably is going to then store up even bigger problems economically for Argentina in the medium term. So I think that this idea of vertical integration would make sense if you had an America that was ruled by the sort of traditional foreign policy establishment.
Yeah.
But I think with Trump, it doesn't help anyone.
Well, Arthur, we love a call to action on this show. Our guest normally gets the opportunity to throw one in. Have you got something up your sleeve that you'd like listeners to do?
Well, I do think that actually at times like this, it's the work of think tanks and people who are trying to get really sort of into the weeds of what's happening in these situations that is really worth supporting. Now, most think tanks don't depend very much on donations or support from individuals, but they do depend on us taking an interest in what they're doing. And so there are certain entities such as the International Crisis Group, such as Chatham House, all of whom are full of brilliant experts doing really interesting research on these challenges, these crises in foreign policy. And I encourage listeners really just to take a look at their work and share it widely with people who might be interested.
Yeah, and often they have lectures and events and online things.
And
you can
mailing
attend
lists that you can join.
Exactly. So we'll drop a link in the show notes to both of those so that you can sign up and fill your brain with more evidence and expert analysis of this incredibly crazy world we find ourselves in.
I didn't realize I was wasting $415 a month until I downloaded Rocket Money. I thought I had my finances under control until the app laid out all my spending and categorized it for me. Takeout, shopping, and unused subscriptions were quietly draining my account. And as a result, my savings took a backseat. But Rocket Money doesn't just tell you what you're wasting money on. It takes action to save you money. First, the app looks at your income and monthly expenses and calculates how much you can safely spend each day to stay under budget. Rocket Money also finds and cancels unwanted subscriptions for you and even negotiates better rates on your bills, so you have more money in your pocket. On average, Rocket Money members can save up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Users love the app with over 186,000 five-star ratings. It's time to simplify your finances and take control of your money. Go to rocketmoney.com/cancel to get started. That's rocketmoney.com/cancel. rocketmoney.com/cancel.
Let's do the 60-second savings challenge. Step 1, download Rocket Money. Step 2, link your accounts and see every subscription you're paying for. Tap one you don't use and cancel it. That's money back every month. Step 3, create a financial goal. $50 every paycheck. Or let the app automatically move small amounts of cash when you can afford it. In a week, you'll forget you set it up. In a month, you'll see real dollars piling up. In a year, you'll be shocked at how much money you've saved. Bonus challenge. Upload an internet or phone bill and let Rocket Money try to lower it. You only pay if they find you savings. On average, Rocket Money members can save up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Users love the app with over 186,000 five-star ratings. Make saving money the resolution you actually keep. Start the 60-second savings challenge at rocketmoney.com/cancel. That's rocketmoney.com/cancel. rocketmoney.com/cancel.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer has committed the British government to seeking closer post-Brexit economic relations with our European cousins through annual bilateral talks rather than just at this year's formal review of the UK-EU deal. As I wrote in The Guardian this week, it's not about rejoining, it's about aligning where it plainly helps on food, energy, industrial sectors beyond agri-food and energy, cooperation with our biggest market. Like Starmer, perhaps, the approach is practical, it's unromantic, and it's focused on outcomes rather than slogans. The usual voices are shouting, Brexit betrayal. But Starmer's gamble is that competence can beat culture war. After years of noise, the question is whether Britain is finally ready for some actual solutions. Let's have a little listen to Starmer talking to Laura Koonsberg at the weekend.
And we've taken important steps towards that with the EU-UK reset, and it is a reset. Relations between the UK and the EU are in the best position they've been for 10 years. And we've already taken steps on food and agriculture to align with the single market. That's the sovereign decision that we have taken. I think we should get closer, and if it's in our national interest, in our interest, to have even closer alignment with the single market, then we should consider that. We should go that far. We're already aligning on energy, reconnecting to energy in Europe, on emissions, but I think the single market, further alignment, as I say, if it's in our interest to do so, we should take that step.
Before Christmas, we had David Lammy, we had Wes Streeting, we had the Liberal Democrats all pushing that Europe Overton window, if you like, talking about things like customs union, about growth through going further than the red lines that Starmer was elected on with regards to Europe and the manifesto. So do you think the reset is being driven by Starmer's own political conviction, by the pressures internally that he's facing within the Parliamentary Labour Party and within Parliament more broadly, or just by the hard maths of a sluggish UK economy that needs the trade?
So I think all of those things play into it. I think the ideological position, it certainly helps that it goes with the grain of what Starmer believes. We know that he's pro-European. We know that he believed in Remain and a second referendum. So yes, I think it helps that he's not ideologically opposed to it. You couldn't see someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg engaging in this kind of policy because it made economic sense. But I think the economic sense and the political sense is what is driving it. It just helps that it goes completely with what he thinks anyway and what he would like to see anyway. And it has interesting echoes of what we were talking about with Donald Trump, because my instinct is that something has happened in the last few months. I think Donald Trump is very ill. I think he's very unwell, and that's why you're seeing this massive acceleration of his legacy building as he sees.
Beware the older man who's running out of time.
Yeah, because it feels to me like the Project 2025 people, they know that they will never get someone who can manipulate the base as well as he can. And time running out. If there is a clock in the background, I think that's why you're seeing this insane acceleration of what's going on. And I think you could suspect that there's a similar thing going on in Starmer's mind, that maybe having settled into the view that either he will be thrown out at the next election or perhaps even sooner, then maybe that has a liberating effect to say, well, might as well go after the sort of things that I think are good for the country. If I'm dead and gone anyway.
Let there be a legacy.
Exactly. Let me do something that is actually useful. And so I think
that I believe in.
And that plays into it. And weirdly, of course, that I think improves the political situation for him, because I think a lot of people want to see him do something that is more based on conviction, want to see him do something that is a bit more radical than what he's been doing so far. And so weirdly, I think resigning to his fate has freed him in a way that might actually put off his fate, if that makes any sense.
It does. Interesting. Arthur, obviously he's facing an election year this year. I think Wales, probably not the priority. It's Holyrood for Labour, a very much more pro-European nation than England and Wales, certainly in the last decade or so. Do you think that could be playing into it, that he's trying to help out Anna Sarwar ahead of a pretty brutal Holyrood election coming fast at him?
One imagines that is the case. And I think Labour in Scotland, of course, at one point looked as though they had finally found a way to counteract the SNP, but very quickly they've got dragged back down, haven't they, by the unpopularity of the national government. With Starmer, you do get the sense of just somehow frozen, that he's just proved not an agile politician. He has got plenty of positive attributes, but he's really not agile. And I'm sure lots of people have sort of heard the report that he says, well, it's time for delivery. When you think, oh my God, this how can you only be saying this now as if you think this is a strategy that's going to transform your political fortunes?
Naomi, you've looked into as much detail as we know about this bill coming up, that, as I understand it, will give effectively the power to ministers, to secretaries of state, to adjust domestic regulation to be dynamically aligned with the EU if they feel that their sector would benefit from that. This is kind of what you've really been pushing for through Best for Britain, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, you were always going to have to legislate for what was agreed at the summit with von der Leyen last year. Long-term listeners will remember the product regulation bill that happened at least a year ago now, which was all about doing the unilateral setting up of our ability to not diverge passively when Europe changed its rules and, oh crap, we're going to have to change ours here or else we're not going to be able to sell stuff to them. So to minimize that passive divergence where you're not sort of actively choosing to go in a different direction on things like safety standards or regulatory levels of requirement for a product from your nearest trading partner. And so there was always going to have to be some kind of legislative process to deliver on it. Now, what has Starmer done? Well, through his negotiator, Nick Thomas-Symonds, and his counterpart over in Brussels, Maros Šefčovič, they did the summit last year. They've all agreed that they're going to try and align on agri-food. They're going to try and align on emissions trading standards and energy. And there was strong talk of getting some kind of youth mobility deal through. Before Christmas, we had the surprising but welcome news that we are rejoining Erasmus. But none of that was ever going to be sufficient to move the economic dial.
Yeah.
But it has to be done because the EU is still struggling to trust the UK as a reliable trading partner. The EU Commission is expending quite significant political capital with member states on the reset. There's been some internal rows. I can point to the collapse in the negotiations over the defence investment fund, SAFE, by one example of that. And so what we need to do is to prove to the EU that we are reliable, that we will fulfil the obligations and the commitments that were agreed to at the summit, if we want to go further. And it's the further bits that will begin to get Starmer the growth that he needs, because that is his government's number one mission. And he's been reinforcing all of that in the last couple of weeks, saying any minute talking about anything other than bringing down the cost of living is a minute wasted. Well, how are you going to do that? You've got to make everything more affordable. That means wages have got to go up as well as prices coming down. And the fortunes of both of those are very much linked to getting that better trade deal with Europe.
Can I ask you, at what point do you think this dynamic alignment basically begins to look a bit like Switzerland wearing a red baseball cap?
Well, I think once we had the Brexit deal that Johnson signed, it was somewhat inevitable that the UK would probably end up going down more of a Switzerland-style path than a Norway-style path. And for listeners who aren't familiar, Norway is an EFTA member, so it has single market access. It has to accept the rules that come with that and freedom of movement. Whereas Switzerland has effectively got about 120 bilateral deals with the EU covering a range of different things. So I think this is a pretty sort of natural extension from that, given how bad the TCA was, particularly for smaller British businesses. So, yeah, you're right. It is looking increasingly like Switzerland, but that's not to say that events, dear boy, don't come along shift the tectonic plates from underneath your feet, and suddenly you are leapfrogging over the customs union and over, EFTA and single market and into let's join again, or let's join as an associate member alongside Ukraine. I think there are lots of different ways this can play out over the next few years in the run up to the next election, largely dependent on who's going to lead the Labour Party into the next election.
Arthur, do you think that the global events that we've been discussing have maybe lit a fire under the let's get closer to Europe again part of the Labour Party, or at the very least created the political space for them to be able to say, look, West, obviously we need to hug our more reliable allies a lot more closely?
Well, you've got to hope so. I think from the minute that Kamala Harris had lost the election, this was obvious, but it's grindingly obvious now. You've got the Trump side of things, but you've also got the factor that Reform are riding high in the polls, and the prospect of Labour winning the next election is certainly, at the moment, looking pretty remote. That doesn't mean things can change, but certainly at the moment, it looks very tough for them. So now is the time to try to get some things organised with Europe and get those embedded. So, of course, if Farage was Prime Minister, he might try and rip everything up. But he might actually want to think twice about it if the British economy is finally showing signs of life.
He's an opportunist, before he is anything else. And if an agri-food deal has begun to bring prices down in supermarkets, if the energy deal has made it cheaper to heat homes, there's no way that Farage is going to tear that up just because it's a deal with Europe. But I think he probably wouldn't go very much further. Hence why I think it's right that Starmer accelerates what he can while he can.
With all of that in mind, what do we think genuine success looks like in 2026 in terms of closer cooperation with the EU? Like, I guess we can do that in two halves. What achievements would we like to see up to the summit? And what ambition would we like to see emerging from the summit?
Sure. I will take that one because it is my day job. I think we need to reignite the safe access negotiations. We need to get that youth experience scheme, formerly called the Youth Mobility Scheme, over the line. We haven't heard Starmer talk much about that. He's focused more on the economic side of things with trade and alignment, but getting young people their right to live, love, work and study across 27 member states, I think is going to be absolutely critical to unlock the other things that we also need and want. So I think delivering on last year is a big thing. So safe, youth mobility, that SPS deal, that agri-food deal, and the energy stuff, get all of the bits and pieces from the common understanding progressed. And then you're into the post-summit agreements of 2026. And I think when the youth experience scheme is working, we can begin to talk about raising the numbers on it because it will probably be capped to start with. And as that works brilliantly, we can say, okay, well, we can raise that. We can have more Europeans coming here, more young Brits going over to Europe. And then we move into the other things around service sector alignment. Can we have mutual recognition of the qualifications of people like architects and lawyers and that kind of thing? So I think really good first half of the year looks like getting youth mobility and agri-food agreed, ongoing negotiations over safe that will hopefully be completed by the end of the year, and then going into the next round, getting all of that alignment extended to other areas of the economy. And I reckon Arthur's going to say something like, nah, Naomi, that's too unambitious. Good looks like rejoining by the end of the year.
Obviously, good would be lovely. But no, I defer to you on this point. I guess the only thing I'd add to it as being ambitious is actually something a bit more structural on defence and security. Now, of course, yes, there's the endless debate about NATO versus the EU, but I think to some extent, as we all know, the trade and cooperation agreement had no chapter on kind of geopolitical and security engagement. And that was a way of the Tories sort of showing that they scorned the EU in that context. It clearly is dysfunctional. We're living in an extremely insecure and unpredictable world, and there needs to be a much more structured framework for cooperating with our closest geographical and geopolitical allies.
Might that actually be a slightly different way into some of the thornier issues to do with single market and customs.
Yeah.
We have to go back in history and remember that, the European Union started as a European community around steel and energy, and it was all about the materials that are important in a wartime scenario. And so might that be the way that it is reignited in many ways as a project to sort of look at security and defense, not just as a massive risk right now, but also as an opportunity for ever closer union, actually?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting concept. And I think one element of this, for example, thinking in terms of energy transition, is the degree to which transboundary electricity supply is becoming more and more important, because obviously with renewable energy sources, there's much more balancing going on, that you have a surge of wind, say in Britain, and it's not in Germany, and therefore you have cables crossing the North Sea, and that's something that is happening anyway, and it's being driven by private sector and general need. But that's the sort of thing where if Europe shows that it can work together in a really smart way in the interest of everybody's energy security, but also with a climate agenda as well. And that's very different. America is rejecting climate change. It's pretending it doesn't exist. So I think that could be a really positive and useful practical step.
Naomi, it's a new year, so I'm going to give the call to action to you.
Oh, thank you.
Knowing pretty much what's coming.
Well, I'm going to ask you all to support the work that Best of Britain does on all of this, and my amazing little tiny team who are mighty and brilliant in the policy work that they do, and helping to create the political space for the government to move into and all of that. So if you can head over to bestofbritain.org/donate, I'd be very grateful. But there are other organisations doing brilliant things too who need your support, either in the form that we talked about in the call to action for Chatham House, signing up to their events and their newsletters, but also bunging them a few quid if you can. So UK in a Changing Europe, led by Anand Menon, also do some brilliant work setting out the evidence and the economic reality and policy detail, rather than all of the flag waving and nostalgia for our relationship with Europe, which is very, very important too. But nonetheless, I would love it if you could support as many pro-European organisations as you are able to do in whatever way you are able. And that is a wrap on our inaugural 2026 show. Arthur, thank you so much for joining us in quite a depressing beginning to the new year.
I'm a little bit the Grim Reaper on these episodes, aren't I? If I'm here, something bad has happened.
We must get you on, actually, when everything is lovely, if that ever happens.
When's that going to be, Alex? Listeners, we have plenty more Cooler Heads content coming your way. There's going to be a bonus show from Quiet Riot out, ever more foreign policy insight from Behind the Lines, and season 2 of Podacy starting in just 2 weeks' time. So we're all very excited about that. And we would ask you to please subscribe, review, and share your favourite episodes.
And you can, of course, support us at ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. We have a big editorial meeting coming up very soon, which is open to all our supporters. So I would urge you to log on to ko-fi.com and support us as quickly as possible to make sure you get the email for that. And we haven't forgotten Wakey Dokey and Grin and Share It, but we are saving them for Sunday school.
Exactly. We're going to be back at the weekend with our Sunday school version of the show. But until then, keep warm, keep toasty, and keep on rioting quietly.
We do love you very much. Bye.
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 Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese.
Quiet Riot.
So, fucking hell. I mean, yeah, we're not going to run out of stuff to talk about, are we?
Welcome to 2026, people.